Welcome to the LBF Church podcast, where we talk about topics that help us grow in our affection toward Jesus and also grow more equipped to follow him in the ways that he's leading us. I'm Dan Franklin, and I'm going to talk about a phrase that has become very common and popular in the United States over the past several months. And that phrase is "speak your truth." Sort of a rallying cry that's grown in popularity, and maybe the most famous moment of this phrase, "speak your truth," was at the Golden Globe Awards earlier this year when Oprah Winfrey gave a big speech. And kind of the culminating point of her speech was when she said, "Speaking your truth is the most powerful tool we all have." And I'll get into a little bit later the context of when she said that, but I just want to start with this phrase. All right, so the phrase, "speak your truth." And I want to advocate for the idea that this is not a good phrase. This is not something that we should say, that this is not a positive thing. And it could be as simple as that. You could say, all right, well, just don't say that. But I think that it's an important thing to talk about because there's at least two worldview issues behind why this phrase has become such a cultural phenomenon. And I think talking about both of those allows us to trace it back, other than just saying, all right, we're not going to say that because we think it's a trendy or a cultural fad. But to say that there's a problem behind this, at least a couple of problems behind this that lead to why it's such a big deal. And so I'm going to deal with those. So problem number one with the whole idea of speak your truth is that it leaves us with the impression that we as human beings are our own source. Not only that we're our own source of truth, but we're our own source of authority, we're our own source of knowledge. And for those of us who are Christians, this is diametrically opposed to how we understand the world. And also how we understand truth. That we understand truth as something that's outside of us, that comes to us, and that we encounter the truth. And we believe that the truth is manifest most fully in Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way and the truth and the life." We believe that God is a source of truth, God is a source of all authority, and we encounter him, and we encounter the truth that he has provided for us. So the whole idea of saying to somebody, hey, you need to speak your truth, that leaves us with this dangerous idea in our minds that we are the source of truth, or that I have a truth that I contain. I don't have a truth that I contain. In fact, the truth often offends us. The truth is something that confronts us and that we have to reckon with, whether we like it or not. I remember when I was younger hearing the story, there was a man who had just been at a bar all night, and so he'd probably had a little bit too much to drink. And he was on a motorcycle, and he got up, and it was dark, it was night, and he looked across the horizon, and he saw two headlights. And the two headlights were right next to each other, and they were kind of ricketing back and forth. And so he got on his motorcycle and said, "I get what's going on. What's going on here is that there's two motorcycles riding side by side, and you're really not supposed to do that. You're supposed to go in a single file, so I'm going to freak him out." So he turned off his headlight and decided, I'm going to speed right between them and surprise them, and it'll be fun to see their reaction. They won't know what happened. Well, what of course he didn't realize is that this was not two motorcycles riding side by side next to each other. It was an old rickety semi-automatic truck who just happened to have headlights that were not aligned with each other. And so when he rode, what he thought was riding right between them, he ended up riding to his death and encountering the reality. That's obviously a stark illustration, but that's how we encounter truth. It doesn't matter about how we perceive reality. One way or the other, we encounter truth, and truth wins. The reality of what we see, the reality of what we encounter is stronger than our own perception or our own idea of reality. And again, as Christians, this is something that's significant because the foundation of what we believe, the foundation of our conception of reality is not just that we have a system of ethics that works and is the best way to handle life. It's that we believe an event happened. We believe that Jesus Christ, a real human being, was raised from the dead. And according to the Apostle Paul, if he was not raised from the dead, then none of this really matters, and the morality, you can take it or leave it. We believe an event happened, and if it's true, we all have to reckon with that event. If it's not true, I guess we can shrug our shoulders and not really deal with the rest of Christian teaching. The truth is not something inside of us. The truth is something outside of us. And I understand that for some people, you might kind of feel like, all right, but that's not necessarily what they mean. When somebody says speak your truth, they don't necessarily mean that the truth is relative. Probably some do, but maybe some don't. And I would just say this, use a different phrase then. Say something different. Our words do matter, and our words reinforce to people around us and also to us how we perceive reality. In fact, there's an interesting passage in the book of James, James chapter 4, where James talks to people and confronts them on something that doesn't seem all that scandalous. He says in verse 13 of chapter 4, "Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money." And that's a strange start to something that seems very confrontational, that James is saying, come over here, you who are arrogant enough to think that you can just decide where you're going to go. He's not saying, come over here, you who are committing adultery or you who are oppressing the poor. He says, come over here, you who are making these plans. And then in verse 14, he says, why you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. He says, you're arrogant. You think that you can look at the future and just say, this is what I'm going to do. And they're not even talking about doing evil things. But he says, how arrogant are you? You're just a vapor. You're just dust. You have no ability to control your future. And then he says in verse 15, instead, you ought to say. Now, just important note here, he doesn't say, instead, in your brain, you ought to think this way. He says, this is actually the words that you should use. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it's sin to them. And now here's the reason why I'm bringing this up. James says, here's where your arrogance is showing up. Your arrogance is showing up in your words. Your arrogance is showing up in how you talk about your future plans. What you really should say is, if we are still alive, and if God wills, then this is what we're going to do. And I'll just say on a personal level, this is something that I really try to practice when I'm talking about future plans where, my family and I just got back from Oregon. And as we were getting ready for the trip and people would say, oh, so you're going up to Oregon? I would usually say, yeah, God willing, we head up next Thursday. And that might seem like, well, why do you need to say that? Is that just Christian fluff? Is that just religious language? And I would say, for me, actually, no, because that's reinforcing to me, and hopefully for some people, reinforcing to others, we don't have the ability on our own to do anything, not even travel. And so if God wills it, and if we're still alive on Thursday, that's our plan. James is saying our words reinforce our conception of reality. So you may say, oh, when I say speak your truth or I'm speaking my truth, I don't really mean that. So use a different phrase then, because usually I think people may mean one of two things. They may mean by speaking my truth, I'm speaking a truth that I'm aware of that other people may not be aware of. In fact, when Oprah Winfrey used the phrase, she was largely talking about the Me Too movement and sexual harassment and women who have stories of men who have been inappropriate with them and that speaking their truth would be telling those stories. What I would say is, well no, that wouldn't be speaking their truth. It would be speaking the truth that other people don't know. It's not their personal truth. They're telling about something that actually happened in real life. So it could be, speaking your truth is telling something that other people may not know that's true. But other times, speaking your truth just means sort of speaking your opinion, speaking about the world as you see it. So somebody might say, you know what? The world would just be better off if we had no private property and we shared everything. And you know what? I'm just speaking my truth. No, you're not speaking your truth. Those aren't objectively true statements. You could try to attempt to make a case that that's how things would work out well in the world, but you're speaking your opinion. And you can own that. And you can say, this is my opinion about how the world should work. But it's not speaking your truth. And this all feeds into the second problem that I see with this phrase. The first problem is that it allows us to indulge the illusion that we are our own source. As Christians, we know we are not our own source. Jesus is the vine. We are the branches. We live only through our connection with him. But the second problem that this brings up is that it feeds our narcissism that the world desperately needs to know what we think about every subject. And social media, of course, is the ultimate engine behind this perception that we have, where we go on the social media site, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and it literally asks us, what's on your mind? What is it that you want to talk about? What is it that you want to share to the world? And some world event happens and we just assume, well, I've got 300 people out there just waiting for what I'm going to say about this. And if I'm going to be a truth teller, or if I'm going to be bold, I clearly need to speak about this in this setting. This feeds our narcissism that we are at the center of the universe and the world desperately needs to know what we think about things. It's something that I often think about when I'm getting ready to delve into an issue, whether it's on social media or some other setting, is just say, has anybody actually asked me about this? Has anybody shown any interest in the idea that my opinion would be important to them? And that doesn't mean sometimes I can speak up on something that nobody's asked me about, but it's an odd conception that we have. Well, I've got to speak my truth. I owe it to the world to tell them what I think about something. That's a really arrogant way to go through life. That feeds our self-perception of inflated importance. Instead of thinking, well, I've got to speak my truth to somehow get this out there, we should be thinking, those of us who are Christians should be thinking, all right, well, what is it that God's calling me to do as far as indulging or engaging in this situation? What is the word that's going to build up according to the need of the moment? Do I need to say anything about this? Is there anything helpful that I can say? I mean, even sticking with the book of James, which I quoted earlier, there's something powerful in chapter 1, verses 19 through 20. And James says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. We should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I think it's interesting that he talks about being slow to speak and slow to become angry, and that those go together. Because often when we're talking about the whole idea of speaking your truth, it's both being quick to speak and being quick to be angry. Usually we're speaking quickly because we're hacked off about something and we feel like we need to rant about this. The world doesn't necessarily need to know your opinion on every matter. And also, maybe you're still forming your opinion. Maybe you're just having an instinctive reaction to something. You don't have any idea what's actually going on in the situation, but you just feel like, I've got to engage on this. I've got to talk about this. I'm going to be a truth teller. Well, in order to be a truth teller, you need to know what in the world is actually going on. You need to know what the truth is. And we start by recognizing that the truth is not my opinion about an issue. The truth is the truth. It's outside of me. I'm confronted by it. Sometimes I'm going to like it. Sometimes I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to have to deal with it either way. And one of the things, and this is just on a practical level, so especially if you're listening to this and you're a member of LBF Church, take this as a word of somebody who's one of your shepherds who wants to point you in maybe a helpful direction. And that's this. I think much of our ranting and sort of, shaking our fists at the heavens and at the world around us that we do on social media is misdirected and is meant to be solved in community. The deal is you may have 1,000 friends on social media or 1,000 followers. Hopefully you realize those people aren't all really your community. Those are people that you know through other people, and maybe you know some of them. Those people are not your community. What most of us need is not 1,000 followers on social media. What most of us need is 3 or 4 really close friends that we can just talk really openly and honestly and without much of a filter with. That we can go to them and say, gosh, this thing happened in the news and I'm really frustrated about it and here's how I feel about it. And they can listen to us, or they can commiserate with us, or they can say, actually, I think you're a little bit off in your understanding of what's happening. But where we can go and say that there is an instinct to say, I care about what's going on, I have something to say, and I want to know that people care about my opinion on it, so I want to speak to them about it. You don't need to rant on social media and hope that somebody in the world picks it up. You need to be around one of your few close friends and just talk to them about that. This is the whole, some of you might be thinking, we're a long way from the whole idea of, why there's a problem with this phrase, speaking your truth. But to me, there's not. We're talking about the fact that this is born out of a culture that, first of all, looks at all of us and says, hey, The truth is within you. You are your own source. You're your own source of truth. You're your own source of authority. How dare anybody tell you how you can live or what you should say or what you should do? It's within you. You decide it. So if you think it's true, you speak your truth. And it's also born out of a culture that's telling us you are so important that you need to get your opinion out to everyone and somehow figure out if they're going to affirm it or deny it or who your true friends are. Neither of those things are true for those of us who are believers in Jesus. We believe that God is the source of truth. I don't have a truth. I'm confronted by the truth, and I can decide to embrace it and believe it or reject it and deal with the consequences of that. And I'm also set free from the need, this narcissistic need to get my opinion on every matter out to people. And instead, I can look at it and say, what has God called me to say? And for those of us as Christians, the center of what God has called us to use our words for is to propagate the gospel of Jesus Christ, to talk about Jesus, to talk about what God has called us to put on display the message that God has spoken that God has spoken reality into existence, spoken the world into existence, and then sent his son to redeem the world that we broke. That's the center of our message. And when we're out there sort of speaking our truth, making sure our opinion is known on all these different matters, we often cloud the issue, and people look at us as Christians and say, well, I'm not sure I want to become a Christian because I don't know that I agree with them politically, or I don't know that I'm on board with that social area, or they don't seem to see things the same way that I do. We should use our words carefully. It's almost like budgeting our words, just like we would our money, to say, all right, what is most important? What am I called to? What is going to build others up according to the need of the moment? And having this conception that I just need to speak my opinion to the whole world is not going to help us with this. Well, on this matter, I'd love to hear comments from some of you. Some of you might think, hey, no, this is a helpful phrase. This is something that I use. This is something that I say to other people. If you feel that way, I'd love to hear your comments on it. I'd love to go back and forth and have some feedback. I'd love for you to consider what I've said, and I'd love to consider what you said. So if that's the case, you can feel free to leave comments or questions or any feedback on our site on lbf.church. You can go to the little tab that says blog and podcast, and you can comment on this episode and also other episodes that we've done of the LBF Church podcast. You can also just subscribe and download the podcast, and you can listen to it every couple weeks when we set out a new episode. Each time we do this, it does help if you leave feedback. It helps if we have subscriptions or likes or ratings or anything like that, because we just want to get more messages out to more people about how we grow in our deep affections for Jesus and how we grow more equipped to follow him and how he's leading us. So thanks for taking the time to listen. I'm Dan Franklin, and this is the LBF Church Podcast.